This is a CBS News Special Report. I'm Norah O'Donnell in the nation's capital. We are just moments away from a rare evening address from the White House. President Biden will make an impassioned plea to urge Congress to pass new gun control measures in hopes of combating the epidemic of gun violence in America. The president's remarks come after the murders of 35 people in 3 high-profile mass shootings alone in the last 3 weeks. Buffalo, New York, Uvalde, Texas, and last night's hospital shooting in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The weapon of choice for the deadliest mass shootings in America, an AR-15 style rifle. Since the day of the Robb Elementary School shooting, there have been at least 20 mass shootings in the United States with 144 victims. And this alarming information from the CDC: guns are now the leading cause of death for children in the United States. President Biden has previously supported reinstating the ban on assault weapons and passing universal background checks. You can see the president now walking through the Cross Hall, 56 candles to represent 50 states and 6 territories. Here now, the President of the United States.
On Memorial Day this past Monday, Jill and I visited Arlington National Cemetery. As we entered those hallowed grounds, we saw rows and rows of crosses among the rows of headstones with other emblems of belief, honoring those who paid the ultimate price on battlefields around the world. The day before, we visited Uvalde, Texas. In front of Robb Elementary School, we stood before 21 crosses for 19 third and fourth graders and 2 teachers. On each cross, a name, and nearby, a photo of each victim that Jill and I reached out to touch. Innocent victims murdered in a classroom that had been turned into a killing field. Standing there in that small town, like so many other communities across America, I couldn't help but think there are too many other schools, too many other everyday places that have become killing fields, battlefields, here in America. We stood at such a place just 12 days before, across from a grocery store in Buffalo, New York, memorializing 10 fellow Americans, a spouse, a parent, a grandparent, a sibling, gone forever. At both places, we spent hours with hundreds of family members who were broken, whose lives will never be the same. They had one message for all of us: do something. Just do something. For God's sake, do something. After Columbine, after Sandy Hook, after Charleston, after Orlando, after Las Vegas, after Parkland, nothing has been done. This time, that can't be true. This time, we must actually do something. The issue we face is one of conscience and common sense. For so many of you at home, I want to be very clear. This is not about taking away anyone's guns. It's not about vilifying gun owners. In fact, we believe we should be treating responsible gun owners as an example of how every gun owner should behave. I respect the culture and the tradition and the concerns of lawful gun owners. At the same time, the Second Amendment, like all other rights, is not absolute. It was Justice Scalia who wrote, and I quote, "Like most rights, the rights granted by the Second Amendment are not unlimited." Not unlimited. It never has been. There have always been limitations on what weapons you can own in America. For example, machine guns have been federally regulated for nearly 90 years, and this is still a free country. This isn't about taking away anyone's rights. It's about protecting children. It's about protecting families. It's about protecting whole communities. It's about protecting our freedom to go to school, to a grocery store, to a church, without being shot and killed. According to new data just released by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, guns are the #1 killer of children in the United States of America. The #1 killer. More than car accidents, more than cancer. Over the last 2 decades, More school-age children have died from guns than on-duty police officers and active-duty military combined. Think about that. More kids than on-duty cops killed by guns. More kids than soldiers killed by guns. For God's sake, how much more carnage are we willing to accept? How many more innocent American lives must be taken before we say enough, enough? I know that we can't prevent every tragedy, but here's what I believe we have to do. Here's what the overwhelming majority of American people believe we must do. Here's what the families in Buffalo and Uvalde in Texas told us we must do. We need to ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. And if we can't ban assault weapons, then we should raise the age to purchase them from 18 to 21. Strengthen background checks, enact safe storage law and red flag laws, repeal the immunity that protects gun manufacturers from liability, address the mental health crisis, deepening the trauma of gun violence and as a consequence of that violence. These are rational, common sense measures. Here's what it all means. It all means this. We should reinstate the assault weapons ban on high-capacity magazines that we passed in 1994 with bipartisan support in Congress and the support of law enforcement. 9 categories of semi-automatic weapons were included in that ban, like AK-47s and AR-15s. And in the 10 years it was law, mass shootings went down. But after Republicans let the law expire in 2004, and those weapons were allowed to be sold again, mass shootings tripled. Those are the facts. A few years ago, the family of the inventor of the AR-15 said he would have been horrified to know that its design was being used to slaughter children and other innocent lives instead of being used as a military weapon on the battlefields, as it was designed. That's what it was designed for. Enough. Enough. We should limit how many rounds a weapon can hold. Why, in God's name, should an ordinary citizen be able to purchase an assault weapon that holds 30-round magazines that let mass shooters fire hundreds of bullets in a matter of minutes? The damage was so devastating in Uvalde, parents had to do DNA swabs to identify the remains of their children. 9 and 10-year-old children. Enough. We should expand background checks to keep guns out of the hands of felons, fugitives, and those under restraining orders. Stronger background checks are something that the vast majority of Americans, including the majority of gun owners, agree on. I also believe we should have safe storage laws and personal liability for not locking up your gun. The shooter in Sandy Hook came from a home full of guns. They were too easy to access. That's how he got the weapons. The weapon he used to kill his mother and then murdered 26 people, including 20 first graders. If you own a weapon, you have a responsibility to secure it. Every responsible gun owner agrees to make sure no one else can have access to it, to lock it up, to have trigger locks. And if you don't, and something bad happens, you should be held responsible. We should also have national red flag laws so that a parent, a teacher, a counselor can flag for a court that a child, a student, a patient is exhibiting violent tendencies, threatening classmates, or experiencing suicidal thoughts. It makes them a danger to themselves or to others. 19 states in the District of Columbia have red flag laws. The Delaware law is named after my son, Attorney General Beau Biden. Fort Hood, Texas, 2009, 13 dead and more than 30 injured. Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, 2018, 17 dead, 17 injured. In both places, countless others suffering with invisible wounds. Red flag laws could have stopped both these shooters. In Uvalde, the shooter was 17 when he asked his sister to buy him an assault weapon. knowing he'd be denied because he was too young to purchase one himself. She refused. But as soon as he turned 18, he purchased 2 assault weapons for himself. Because in Texas, you can be 18 years old and buy an assault weapon, even though you can't buy a pistol in Texas until you're 21. If we can't ban assault weapons, as we should, we must at least raise the age to be able to purchase one to 21. Look, I know some folks will say 18-year-olds can serve in the military and fire those weapons. But that's with training and supervision by the best trained experts in the world. Don't tell me raising the age won't make a difference. Enough. We should repeal the liability shield that often protects gun manufacturers from being sued for the death and destruction caused by their weapons. They're the only industry in this country that has that kind of immunity. Imagine if the tobacco industry had been immune from being sued, where we'd be today. The gun industry special protections are outrageous. It must end. And let there be no mistake about the psychological trauma that gun violence leaves behind. Imagine being that little girl, that brave little girl in Uvalde, who smeared blood off her murdered friend's body onto her own face to lie still among the corpses in her classroom and pretend she was dead in order to stay alive. Imagine what it'd be like for her to walk down the hallway of any school again. Imagine what it's like for children who experience this kind of trauma every day in school, in the streets, in communities all across America. Imagine what it's like for so many parents to hug their children goodbye in the morning, not sure whether they'll come back home. Unfortunately, too many people don't have to imagine that at all. Even before the pandemic, young people were already hurting. There's a serious youth mental health crisis in this country. We have to do something about it. That's why mental health is the heart of my unity agenda that I laid out in the State of the Union address this year. We must provide more school counselors, more school nurses, more mental health services for students and for teachers, more people volunteering as mentors to help young people succeed, more privacy protection and resources to keep kids safe from the harms of social media. This unity agenda won't fully heal the wounded souls, but it will help. It matters. I just told you what I'd do. The question now is, what will the Congress do? The House of Representatives has already passed key measures we need. Expanding background checks to cover nearly all gun sales, including at gun shows and online sales. Getting rid of the loophole that allows a gun sale to go through after 3 business days, even if the background check has not been completed. And the House is planning even more action next week. Safe storage requirements, the banning of high-capacity magazines, raising the age to buy an assault weapon to 21, federal red flag law, codifying my ban on ghost guns that don't have serial numbers and can't be traced, and tougher laws to prevent gun trafficking and straw purchases. This time, we have to take the time to do something. And this time, it's time for the Senate to do something. But as we know, in order to get anything done in the Senate, we need a minimum of 10 Republican senators. I support the bipartisan efforts that include a small group of Democrats and Republican senators trying to find a way. But my God, the fact that the majority of the Senate Republicans don't want any of these proposals even to be debated or come up for a vote, I find unconscionable. We can't fail the American people again. Since Uvalde, just over a week ago, there have been 20 other mass shootings in America, each with 4 or more people killed or injured, including yesterday at a hospital in Tulsa, Oklahoma. A shooter deliberately targeted a surgeon using an assault weapon he bought just a few hours before his rampage that left a surgeon, another doctor, a receptionist, and a patient dead and many more injured. That doesn't count the carnage we see every single day. It doesn't make the headlines. I've been in this fight for a long time. I know how hard it is, but I'll never give up. And if Congress fails, I believe this time a majority of the American people won't give up either. I believe the majority of you will act to turn your outrage into making this issue central to your vote. Enough, enough, enough. Over the next 17 days, the families in Uvalde will continue burying their dead. It will take that long in part because it's a town where everyone knows everyone. And day by day, they will honor each one they lost. Jill and I met with the owner and staff of the funeral home as being strong to take care of their own. And the people of Uvalde mourn as they do over the next 17 days. What will we be doing as a nation? Jill and I met with the sister of the teacher who was murdered and whose husband died of a heart attack 2 days later, leaving behind 4 beautiful orphaned children, all now orphaned. The sister asked us, what could she say? What could she tell her nieces and nephews? It's the most heartbreaking moments that I can remember. All I could think to say was, I told her to hold them tight. Hold them tight. After visiting the school, we attended Mass at Sacred Heart Catholic Church with Father Eddie. In the pews, families and friends held each other tightly. As Archbishop Gustavo spoke, he asked the children in attendance to come up on the altar and sit in the altar with him as he spoke. There wasn't enough room, so Mom and her young son sat next to Jill and me in the first pew. And as we left the church, a grandmother who had just lost her granddaughter passed me a handwritten letter. It read, quote, erase the invisible line that is dividing our nation. Come up with a solution and fix what's broken and make the changes that are necessary to prevent this from happening again. End of quote. My fellow Americans, enough. Enough. It's time for each of us to do our part. It's time to act for the children we've lost, for the children we can save, for the nation we love. Let's hear the call and the cry. Let's meet the moment. Let us finally do something. God bless the families who are hurting. God bless you all. From a hymn based on the 91st Psalm sung in my church. May he raise you up on eagle's wings and bear you on the breath of dawn, make you to shine like the sun and hold you in the palm of his hand. That's my prayer for all of you. God bless you.
And there you have it, the President of the United States saying, for God's sake, how much carnage are we willing to take? It is time to act. Let's finally do something. The president calling to reinstate the assault weapons ban from 1994 and to ban high-capacity magazines. He also said if we can't ban assault weapons, then we should raise the age from 18 years old to 21 years old. Why is that significant? Well, as we've reported, 6 of the 9 last mass shootings have involved men under the age of 21 years old. These are young men using high-capacity assault rifles to kill innocent children and others. The president also calling for universal background checks, national red flag laws to end gun manufacturers' special protections. And he said this is not an effort about taking away anyone's guns. He said this is about common sense gun reform. Let's bring in our senior White House and political correspondent, Ed O'Keefe. And Ed, the president impassioned and also setting forth some very ambitious policy proposals.
He was reiterating some that he campaigned on, including renewing the assault weapons ban, for example. But that's going nowhere fast right now in Congress, where conversations continue about potential legislation. Most notably, he mentioned those ongoing talks among senators in both parties. The assault weapons ban is not being discussed. A national red flag law also doesn't appear to be on the table. But creating incentives for more states to pass one might be. Talk about an age limit is also up for debate, but there's differences about whether there should be a blanket federal increase in how old you can be, or whether there might be some deal where parents of a 19-year-old, for example, could go with them to purchase the gun, and so they're at least aware of what's going on. What's also not clear, Norah, is while he talks tonight about a hope that the nation will somehow rally behind Congress as they try to cut a deal, there's no plan currently that we're aware of, at least, and that aides say is in the works, to have the president engage in the specifics with Democrats and Republicans. They appear right now, the president does, to be giving them space, probably just through early next week, before he may decide to engage in some way, if there's a signal that there's some kind of a deal coming together. And it will not include everything he listed tonight. So the question will be, what will he consider acceptable if it is or is not in this agreement? The assault weapons ban, for example, again, he's campaigned on it. He helped write the one that was passed in the 1990s, but there currently exists no votes to make that happen, at least in the evenly divided Senate.
All right, Ed O'Keefe, thank you. Let's go to Capitol Hill because the House Judiciary Committee has just advanced a package of gun control restrictions called the Protecting Our Kids Act. Congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane joins us now. So, Scott, explain what is in that package and the chances it has in the Senate.
Among the components, Norah, raising the minimum age for purchasing semi-automatic rifles from 18 years old to 21 years old, a ban on those high-capacity magazines, on bump stocks, and addressing ghost guns. This advancement in the House Judiciary Committee, down party lines, sets up a series of debates and votes in the U.S. House next week. But there is no one who believes those components and this bill has a chance at that narrow, treacherous path to 60 votes, bipartisan votes, in the U.S. Senate. But House members wanted to be seen trying today. The Judiciary Committee came back to town. They had this marathon debate. The Judiciary Committee is known for being politically fierce, sometimes very ugly. Not so today. A little more muted. I think the members were reading the room and the moment, but this was a traditional down party lines debate, and in the Judiciary Committee moments ago, Norah, a party line vote.
Okay, Scott, that's the House. Let's talk now about the Senate, because we have heard from a bipartisan group of senators saying today that they are making some progress on a compromise. What kind of progress are they making?
Well, they had a fourth day of discussions and conversations, phone calls and Zoom meetings in this fiercely and narrowly divided U.S. Senate. That constitutes progress and optimism. Some of the key players are on your screen. The two Connecticut Democratic senators, who of course represent Newtown and Sandy Hook, both use the phrase productive to describe those discussions. Susan Collins, the Republican from Maine, says rapid progress is being made. And even Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell says he's hopeful and optimistic, but says any deal must be consistent with the Constitution and, in his words, the culture of most of our country. I talked to a Sandy Hook teacher today who says she's also optimistic that the conversations are ongoing. But what's on the table most likely? Federal support for red flag laws. 19 states and the District of Columbia have them. They allow courts to order guns seized from people deemed dangerous. Nor that's possibly, if not likely, the most tenable provision to get to those 60 votes.
Scott MacFarlane on Capitol Hill for us. And just to recap, the president now calling for a ban on assault weapons that did exist, but did expire in 2004. And the president making the case that since the expiration of that ban on assault weapons, in his word, this gun violence has tripled. He said there's been Columbine, there's been Parkland, Sandy Hook, Aurora. I mean, we know many of these, all of which an assault weapon was used. The president said nothing has been done after all of those mass shootings. This time, that can't be true. This time, we must do something. Many people that want something done are the parents and families of people in Uvalde, Texas, where 3 victims of the May 24th elementary school shooting were laid to rest today. Let's bring in Lilia Luciano, who is there in Uvalde. And Lilia, the president ending his remarks today talking about the family and going to Sacred Heart Catholic Church there and praying with many of them.
That's right, Norah, and praying with the priests there at the Sacred Heart Catholic Church, who we've been meeting with as well, who we've been talking to. Many of the families that President Biden talked about we have spoken with too. And I'll tell you, this is a community that understands the gun culture of Texas. This is a community that says, look, there's a lot of hunting here. This is a community that I've asked, what would you like to see happen to prevent other families, of all of the parents that I've spoken to, of the siblings, little siblings, older siblings, Maggie Mireles, the sister of Eva Mireles, step-parents, cousins, grandparents. They don't start with the conversation about guns. They start with a conversation about grief of what they've lost. They talk about the answers that they still need from police to understand the way that this crisis, that this shooting was handled. But without fail, every conversation, whether it is with a parent, like the mom of Timothy Silva, who was in a different classroom and told me, I'm just happy that I didn't get shot, to the farm worker father that I spoke to yesterday, the father of Rogelio Torres, who told me, I don't have power in this country. I see the way that this community is over-policed, and yet they didn't show up. But without fail, all of those families, Norah told me, there's no reason why an 18-year-old with a history that shooter had should have this kind of weapon. And without fail, all of those conversations end up with these parents saying there needs to be gun control for at least this kind of weapon.
And Lilia, for those that say that there needs to be more armed officers outside of schools, what are you learning in Uvalde? I mean, there was a quick response by the police, but the question is they didn't go inside, correct?
Exactly, Norah. There is a small school district police that has 6 officers. The chief of that police agency is the one who took charge. But then you had the Texas Rangers, so the Department of Public Safety here in Texas. You had sheriffs, you had troopers, you had the Border Patrol. And still 75 minutes went by before that shooter was stopped. So, that tells you something, whether it was that the officers wouldn't go in for a reason or the lack of communication.
Lilia Luciano in Uvalde for us. Thank you. I want to bring back in Ed O'Keefe, who's at the White House, because Ed, on that note, just the politics of this, where do the national polls, the American people, stand now when it comes to new gun reform legislation?
Well, overwhelmingly, there's support for expanding and revamping the national background check system. There is support for some kind of a ban on most of these high-capacity weapons. And Democrats especially understand that, but they also understand the frustration or the limitations that they currently face in Congress, given the even divide. I think what you heard the president say there almost immediately at the top, that he's not coming after everybody's guns, that he respects the culture of gun ownership in this country, is a key part of what he is going to have to continue to say, because it's one of the lines of attack and criticism that's used against him by Republicans or by gun rights backers. And so by continuing to say this isn't about taking away rights, it's about protecting children. And it is those young children who died in Texas there that seems to really have compelled lawmakers this time, understanding that Sandy Hook was one thing, that it happened again is unacceptable, and that they need to be working towards a solution.
Ed O'Keefe at the White House, and to all our correspondents, thank you. The president making this impassioned plea today, saying, for God's sake, how much carnage are we willing to take, as he pushes for this bold new legislation that faces little chance of passing in the U.S. Congress. Our coverage will continue on CBS News Streaming, your local news, and for those of you in the West, tonight on the CBS Evening News. This has been a CBS News Special Report. I'm Norah O'Donnell in Washington.